Just 2 minutes, we are going to put it on live. Right. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this exclusive webinar on special economic zones, the key to boost India's exports, organized by the Trade Promotion Council of India. This session today will cover broadly the growth of SEZs and their role in India's exports since the launch of the SEZ Act 2005, achievements and challenges faced by businesses, relevance of SEZs in India's exports going forward, and the roadmap for SEZ policy in the coming years. For this session, we are fortunate to have a highly esteemed panel of experts spanning policy, academia, industry, and trade law. At this juncture, I would like to welcome them and introduce them to you. We have with us today Mr. ARM Reddy, Zonal Development Commissioner, Vishakhapatnam, SEZ, Mr. Suvankar Sen, Executive Director, Senco Gold, Mr. Sunil Rallan, Chairman and Managing Director, Chennai Free Trade Zone, Professor Partha Pratim Pal, IIM Kolkata, Mr. Harsh Hiru Gursahani, Council International Trade Laws and Food Laws, PLR Chambers. We had a sixth confirmed panelist, Mr. Neville Tata, Executive Director, Renaissance Global Limited, who has expressed regret since he had to opt out at the last minute due to health reasons. We wish him a speedy recovery. Now, before going to the panelists, I will just be giving a brief presentation to set the context for this topic. Right. So, first of all, we would like to understand what special economic zones mean. A special economic zone is defined as an area in a country that is subject to different economic regulations than other regions within the same country. The government has defined it as a designated duty-free enclave to be treated as a territory outside the customs territory of India for the purpose of authorized operations in the SEZ. Now, according to UNCTAD, interestingly, 140 economies and more than that around the world have adapted this SEZ policy or have SEZs because of the numerous benefits they promise, such as relative ease of implementing business reforms, perceived low cost of establishment, and a flexible regulatory regime. If you look at a brief background, India was among the front runners in Asia to recognize the effectiveness of EPZs or export processing zones, with Asia's first EPZ set up in Kandla way back in 1965. But the SEZ policy was in fact first announced in April 2000 to overcome the various shortcomings faced by Indian businesses, which included multiplicity of controls and clearances, absence of world-class infrastructure, unstable fiscal regime. After widespread consultations, the SEZ Act came into effect on February 10, 2006. And these were the primary objectives for SEZs and why the policy was introduced. The first is economic activity, promotion of exports, a very important objective, clearly outlined since the beginning, promotion of investment from domestic and foreign sources, creation of employment opportunities, and development of infrastructure facilities. The incentives which were provided to SEZ units, we can just do a brief overview of that. Duty-free import, domestic procurement of goods for development, operation, and maintenance of units. 100% income tax exemption on export income. So it was contingent on exports as a essential criteria. For the sunset clause for that was with effect from April last year applicable and was extended to June as per the reports we have seen. And after that, the sunset is applicable. Exemption from minimum alternate tax, which has also been withdrawn later in April 2012. Exemption from central sales tax, service tax, and state sales tax, which have now been subsumed into GST. And similarly, other levies are imposed by respective state governments. They get a leeway on that. And single window clearance for central and state level approvals. So a brief overview of how they have fared. This is the latest data on SEZs, the number of formal approvals as per December to January this year, 425 notified SEZs, 378, and there are operational SEZs are 265, and 5,481 units have been approved. When we look at the outcome of SEZs, we look at three primary criteria. Investment, if you see the incremental investment since February 2006, it looks like a pretty huge number, 603,644 crore, that's 6 lakh crore roughly, which has been additional investment. Similarly, additional employment has been around 2.1 million people. In terms of exports, rupees 22,840 crore was the export value from SEZs in 2005-6, and by 2019-20 it had reached over nearly 8 lakh crore and a CAGR of roughly 28.9% since then. Now, when you look at now, this is where the comparison comes in. That this is comparison not SEZs in particular, but merchandise exports in general. Now, since 2005 to 2017, for which the data was analyzed, India's exports, merchandise exports, were at $100 billion then, 1% of global merchandise trade. And in 2017, it had reached 300 billion, which is 1.7%. In comparison, China's exports have reached were at 690 billion, 6.7% of global merchandise exports in 2005. By 2017, they had reached $2.2 trillion, or 12.7% of global merchandise exports. The comparison also made because of the reason that SEZs are considered to be a critical component of China's success in exports. The sector-wise share is another area where there is debate and discussion, because in India in particular, there has been a huge share of ITES in terms of number of units, in terms of also how they have benefited from SEZs. It's been primarily the services sector and in particular ITES which has benefited from the SEZ regime. And now we come to some of the issues which would come up for discussion in today's webinar. The first one, of course, is sunset clause for claiming income tax concessions, which industry wants to be extended. Another issue which comes up often is the huge land for SEZs, which is still underutilized. So there is a provision, but it is not being used. Reintroduction of taxation has impacted the benefits which originally were perceived and were available to SEZ units. Then absence of complementary infrastructure. It is also, industry also comments that flexibility in labor laws is not the same in India as other countries, even in the SEZ. And most importantly, SEZ laws are challenged at the WTO because of the core criteria of being net foreign exchange earners, which enables them to receive these incentives. As I mentioned earlier, majority of SEZs are in the services sector. Some other issues which come up, SEZ units are not allowed to do job work for DTA units. So existing capacity in SEZs needs to be more optimally utilized, and this would help. Domestic sales of SEZs, in fact, face a disadvantage because they pay full custom duty as compared to an FTA, for instance, with ASEAN region. So that is considered as a barrier to, actually encourage companies to invest. Then rationalization of multiple modes of economic zones. We have different types of economic zones like, the coastal economic zone, Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, national investment and manufacturing zone, food park, textile park. So there is a need for rationalization of all these for more clarity in investors and businesses. The government constituted a Baba Kalyani committee, which gave some recommendations in 2019, and these were specifically to in context that how to make SEZ policy more conducive. Some of the key recommendations at that time were shifting the framework from export growth to employment and economic growth, because that may also help us override the WTO, ruling which says that we are not compliant with WTO norms. Then formulation of separate rules and procedures for manufacturing and services SEZs. Ease of doing business in these employment economic enclaves should happen in sync with state EODB initiatives. So there is a request for better synchronization, extension of the sunset clause, as mentioned earlier, high-speed multimodal connectivity, business services, infrastructure are important so that SEZs can become more competitive. And promotion of MSME activities in these enclaves is enabling sectoral diversification also because of the underutilized land so that more businesses can be set up and that land can be put to use. Now, what is the future perspective and why this session becomes important today? Because firstly, expectations of restructuring of supply chains post-COVID means that countries like India are looking at a window of opportunity, but windows, as we know, are not permanent. They are temporary and they need to be capitalized on. Government has been looking at actively improving self-reliance through initiatives like Atmanirbhar Bharat and PLI scheme. Through ODOP scheme, also India is looking to enhance export competitiveness of each district. And therefore, we are eagerly awaiting the provisions in the new foreign trade policy because we are looking at especially how India can emerge as a new epicenter of manufacturing in Asia and move to the high end of the value chain. Right. So at this juncture, I would now like to move to the panelists and let's have a discussion on these issues. We'll be dividing this into three sections. One will be the understanding of how SEZs have performed till date. The second section is a special segment, sector focus section on the gems and jewelry sector. And finally, we will have a segment where we will talk about the current and future perspective of policy roadmap and business competitiveness. So first of all, I would like to come to Mr. ARM Reddy. Sir, I would like to ask you, how do you view the evolution and performance of SEZs in India, right from the implementation of the Act, given the objectives which were propelling exports, investments, and building world-class industrial infrastructure? So, sir, over to you. Sir, your voice is on mute, please.
It always happens. Sorry for that.
No problem, sir.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Virat. And I welcome all the panelists who are present here, all the distinguished panelists and other audience who are here. And in this regard, I would like to share a small presentation, though very hurriedly made in just half an hour because I was given only 6 minutes time. Anyway, I'll just share this one. Virat, are you doing or where is this one?
Should I do it? I'll just do it, sir. Just a second.
Now it is visible. Just wait. I am doing. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Fine.
Is that now visible?
Yes, sir. Yes. Sir.
Yeah. Thank you. This our headquarters, Vishakhapatnam Special Economic Zone, the first one to be set up in 1989 after 24 years after the Kondla Special Economic Zone came into existence in India, the first in the Asia. And this is the question that has been given to me as a panelist. Thank you, Virat. I must thank you very sincerely that you have addressed all my points, what I wanted to say in your presentation itself. You have said that SEZs are doing very well in India. You have shown all the projections and figures and everything. That way, I've seen. Just if you look at, I'll try to justify on three things: evolution and performance of SEZs in India with respect to propelling exports, boost investments, and build infrastructure, world-class infrastructure. See, in this regard, all of you know that the SEZ policy came into existence in 2000, and then SEZ Act came in 2005, and the rules came in 2006. All these things have been given by Mr. Virat. But otherwise, I just want to say that India is in the third position in the world in respect of special economic zones after China and Philippines. Of course, he has given all the numbers. What are all the number of SEZs in India? Now we have got 265 operational SEZs in India. And coming to you can see that first thing is that propelling exports. Exports were growing constantly in India. Starting from 2005, I'll show you a graph afterwards. But it started, you can see now in 2019-20, it was 7.22 lakh crore exports were made from the SEZs in the country. And the employment generated was 22.15 lakh. I'm more comfortable with the rupees. I'm sorry for that. Rallan always uses billions and dollars that I don't know. Anyway, these were the figures given or gathered from the websites of the ministry. And now, of course, during the current pandemic, during 2020-21, the exports came down to 5.53 lakh. And coming to the building of infrastructure, I should say that before SEZs came into existence, there was no that kind of infrastructure existed in the country. I can just talk of where I am working in Vishakhapatnam Special Economic Zone. Has jurisdiction over Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Chhattisgarh. Of course, Chhattisgarh doesn't have much activity. But if you look at Telangana, see, 80% of the exports come from Telangana, mostly services sector, as told by Virat in his presentation also. There, the world-class infrastructure has come. No such kind of infrastructure exists anywhere in the country. Like you look at the infrastructure built by the Phoenix, GMR, DLF, GAR, NSL, Divija, Divyasri, Raheja, Lakshmi Infoman, and the TCS, Infosys. It's just, you can't imagine that this kind of infrastructure could have come into India without the SEZs into existence. And you can also think of Wipro, Tech Mahindra, then come to the infrastructure at Brandix. It's world class. You can really appreciate that. You look at the Apache in Andhra Pradesh, then you look at the Sri City SEZ, and you look at the Divis, one of the most performing SEZs. We got Romkey, we got BP SEZ. These are all world-class infrastructure. EID Parry, you got AP SEZ at Vishakhapatnam. These are all world-class infrastructure has come up only because of the SEZs which have come into existence after 2005. And if you look at, I'll go to some of the figures. These are the figures which show that India stands at third place. It shows 373 and Virat has shown 378, it's slightly later figure. And if you look at, you can see the exports coming from SEZ starting from 2005-06 to 2019-20, how it's constantly rising. And I can say that in 2005-06, it was 0.23 lakh crore exports. And now it's 5.53 lakh crore exports in 2020-21 despite pandemic. Otherwise, it was last year, it was 7.22 lakh, you can see. And almost it has grown 24 times in just 15 years in the country. The exports grown 24 times. And if you see, these contributes to 1/3 of the total exports from the country. Total exports from the country, almost nearly 1/3. And I tell you, if the SEZs were not performing, I'll ask a question, were not performing so well, why so many SEZs are being set up? I've been here just for the sake of, for 2 years, from 2019, I'm here, March 2019. During my simple tenure of 2 years, 3 world-class SEZs have become operational. And similarly, and I can tell you, in 2019-20 itself, 90 new units were approved by me with an investment to the tune of 7,970 crores. And during 2021, it was complete lockdown, pandemic, so much of crisis in the world, in the country. And we have approved 22 new units with 500 crore investment. And now come to 2021-22, second wave, still the pandemic is continuing, the crisis is continuing in the country. But still, in just 2 months' time, we have approved 4 new units with an investment to the tune of 4,000 crores. And they will generate not only employment and exports. Employment will be to the tune of 9,750 from these 4 units that we have approved in 2021-22. And we have been convening USC meetings every month. And I tell you, our folder is complete. Almost 20-30 agenda are coming. Doesn't mean that all our new SEZs or new units, that's expansion. Lot many units are going for expansion. Lot many broadbanding is taking place. In every unit, broadbanding is taking place. And of course, our BSEZ is performing in an outstanding manner. In the last 3 years, our figures show that during 1920, the growth was 32.79%. And in 2021, the growth was 14.5%. When the whole country was recording negative growth, we at VSEZ recorded a growth of 14.5%. And come to 21-22, in just 2 months and 10 days, we have recorded an increase of 32% in merchandise and 13% in services. with an average growth of 19% compared to last year. That's our exports in just two months and 10 days is to the tune of 16,400 crores. And these all things, I don't need to give you any proof that SEZs are performing outstanding in the country despite the pandemic. Of course, there was an impact on the overall exports of the country, but most of the SEZs are still performing very well in the months of April and May also. That's mainly because of the single window system and ease of doing business and all other things which are put in place in the SEZs. So, Mr. Virat and the distinguished panelists who are present here, in my opinion, the evolution and performance of SEZs in India, right from the implementation of the Act, given its objectives to propel exports, boost investments, and build world-class infrastructure, has been by and large very, very successful. This is what I'd like to say. Thank you. You can see here, these are all the figures which I wanted to say. How the growth, see, you can see phenomenal growth of 220 times exports in just 16 years in BSEZ from 2003 to 2019. Cumulative growth rate of exports from India is only 1.49% from 2014 to 2018. And growth rate of exports from SEZs in the country from 2014-15 to 18-19 is 51.2%. I would like to say that you have to give an exception for this pandemic period of 2 years. That's why I have restricted myself to 2018-19. Till that time, it was doing very wonders. Thank you. This is what I wanted to say.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. You can stop the screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think you've delivered a very informative and interesting presentation in a very short span of time. Thank you so much. I would like to come to now Professor Partha Pratim Pal. Sir, in light of this current window of opportunity which India has, first of all, of course, your views on that. How do you see the role of SEZs in helping India capture a major share of global value chain? And
Okay,
of course,
so,
views on the policy, if you would like to give as well.
Yeah. So, okay, so you see the window of opportunity came because of broadly initially two reasons. First, there was rising wages in China, and because initially the companies tried to relocate to China to take advantage of the productivity adjusted wage cost, they were finding the wages to be high. And then came the COVID related issues. So companies then tried to have a China plus one policy, etc. Then there were these two other things which also came in. First, the trade war. Many exports from China were being restricted in USA, so they were trying to find a way through Vietnam, etc. And fourth, there was some environmental regulation which were coming up in China, and therefore the more environmentally polluting industries were trying to relocate to other countries where the regulations were not as strict. So these are the four factors which started pushing the companies from China to other parts of the country. And mostly these companies are trying to get into the ASEAN region. India has not received many foreign direct investment due to this reason. There was also this additional problem that was introduced because India said that any foreign direct investment coming from China, coming from neighboring countries, needs to have a needs to be cleared by the government, so on and so forth. But overall, the opportunity is there for India, and special economic zones can definitely play a very important role. It can facilitate also India's entry in the global value chains in a big way. India is not a very big player in the global value chains. These companies which are now trying to relocate out of China, many of them are part of these global value chains, the so-called the factory of the world kind of companies. So they can come to India. However, I have a few points. I'm kind of doubts about a few areas. That should India be indiscriminate in getting these companies, or should India try to focus in getting companies where India has certain kind of comparative advantage or competitive advantage? If you just accept any company coming out of China, then is it sustainable? Especially if you are getting companies at the lower end of the value chain, which basically operate on cheap labor cost. These are footloose companies, right? They may here They may be here for a few years when India's wage costs are low, and may move to Cambodia, Bangladesh, or some other country in a few years' time. So that may not be a sustainable strategy if you are just looking at any companies. And very importantly, and more importantly, when we are looking at the new policy of special economic zones, I think we should also need to keep in mind that a major change in industry is coming up. We are looking at automation, we are looking at 3D printers, we are looking at Internet of Things, etc. I think when we are planning our special economic zone strategy, we should keep in mind that we need to create a technologically advanced cluster. And while the number of SEZs India is very large, the large number also is a problem, because if you have large number of small SEZs, you do not harness the economies of scale. In China, the size of the SEZs are massive. There can be one province and itself entire province is an SEZ. So we also need to think about the advantages of agglomeration economics. For example, the advantages of size, the economies of scale. So we should draw companies definitely, but we should also keep in mind the size of we should also keep in mind the economies of scale, technological advancement, and India's comparative advantage while we attract these companies. So that is what my starting remarks are.
I guess understanding where our competitiveness lies and being focused on quality rather than just going, as you said, too aggressive on SEZs is what you are suggesting. I would like to now come to Mr. Sunil Rallan, sir. Your views on the policy again and your experience in as an SEZ developer, and why do you see a majority of Indian SEZs concentrated in the services sector and not manufacturing? How can this be changed, and especially in context of the Baba Kalyani committee recommendations, which probably were on similar lines?
Thank you, TPCI, for inviting me to this online event. Good afternoon, Viratji, and my distinguished fellow co-panelists, and to the viewers and participants in today's webinar. The STPI scheme had already been in place before the SEZ policy was introduced. Real estate developers and the tenants already knew this business model very well. Once the tax incentives in the STPI scheme were phased out, there was an exponential growth in the IT SEZs. The manufacturing sector, didn't have similar opportunities due to a variety of reasons, and the restrictions and limitations in the SEZ framework didn't help much either. However, now there's winds of change in the world with the ongoing trade war and the global pandemic. Several manufacturing units are seeking to relocate outside China. Many investors have found Vietnam, Thailand, and the other ASEAN region countries to be very attractive because of the stable policies and a predictable investment environment. India also has now been able to attract a few manufacturing units with our recent PLI scheme. These factories are primarily seeking to cater to the Indian domestic market. Manufacturing units find themselves in India setting up discrete factories for DTA and exports in order to comply with the duty exemption schemes and the tax refund mechanisms. SEZs, have the potential of becoming very attractive for these relocating units if only we could enable them to seamlessly supply both to the DTA and the global markets. Now, by this, if you see the Chinese factories, they are supplying to the whole world, including into India. And Indian market share in the Chinese basket of exports is just under 2.7%, which means 92.3% goes to the other markets in the world. Now, when these factories are looking to relocate into India, they want to be able to complete supplies to the whole world. And there is a way forward for this. We have several learnings from the manufacturer and other operations in warehouse regulation scheme referred to as the Mover 2019 scheme. There is an urgent need in the SEZs to de-link the SEZ fiscal incentives from export obligation. This has already been challenged in the WTO by a number of Indian trading partners, where India has already lost the case. The Mover scheme provides upfront remissions of duties and taxes and is de-linked from an export obligation. Products, we have seen which are manufactured in the SEZ unit and supplied to DTA are subject to tariff on the entire value of the finished product, including the local value addition. There have been several instances where products were imported from ASEAN region countries with whom we have a FTA at much lower tariffs than what is supplied from the SEZ units. SEZ units must be charged to tariff only on the duty foregone principle, as is the practice in the Mover scheme. The next change where we seek SEZs to be facilitated is permitting job work by SEZs for the DTA, which is permissible under the Mover scheme. Now, let me explain to you a classical situation of a job work by taking the live example of a German company which manufactures state-of-the-art gearboxes in Coimbatore for use in windmills in India and overseas. The German company is required to provide after-sales service to all its Indian customers, including those who were supplied from its Chinese factory. The Indian SEZ unit is, however, permitted to provide after-sales service only for those gearboxes which were supplied from their Coimbatore factory. All the other gearboxes supplied from China continue to be sent back to China for servicing, despite the Indian unit having state-of-the-art machinery and adequate capacity. Needless to say, this makes the entire process highly inefficient and expensive. And above all, the German parent company can't relocate lock, stock, and barrel to India, even if they are prepared to do so. We have seen so many such situations for manufacturing, and where the manufacturing exports have a huge potential now in India. We find that we are tying ourselves up with our own policy mechanism, which we need to, have a relook and a revisit. And, India against these ASEAN countries is definitely placed at a very strong position and an advantage, because if you look at the countries, whether it is in Singapore or in Thailand or Vietnam, the domestic market is very, very small. In India, the main attraction is the domestic market. And just as I shared with you the data, 2.6% of the Chinese exports is coming to India, and 92.3% goes to the rest of the world. Imagine in theory, if factories like this were to relocate to India and access the 2.6% markets made from using the Make in India concept, and their factories could export 92.3% to the rest of the world, the kind of change that manufacturing in India would see. Thank you for now.
So what do you think can be done to diversify the services exports? Because again, within services, we have a more focused share of IT, ITES. So how can we balance it with more services sectors taking a greater share? Do you see potential in other sectors?
Yes, I see a lot of potential in the other sectors, because the ambit of services needs to be extended actually to the manufacturing sector. The term servification of manufacturing, refers to the fragmentation of manufacturing production into such activities as R&D, marketing, machining, logistics, to name a few. And we have seen that in the context from the other countries, from whom we can learn from their experiences, like China, Republic of Korea, Taiwan, and some of the ASEAN member countries like Vietnam, in designing smart subsidies for services, which are inputs into manufacturing and help to make the improve the competitiveness of these manufacturing. You know, in India, it is very well known that logistics costs are around 13 to 14% of our GDP, while it's around 8% in the developed world and probably still lower in China. You know, in India, it's also not uncommon for Indian factories to provide transportation logistics by running hundreds of buses to ferry workers to and fro into the units. In Chennai, you know, we've seen in the past classic situations when Nokia was fully operational. They were running 700 buses on a daily basis. And at any given point of time, for example, in the morning, if the buses ran bumper to bumper, there was no place on the highway for any other traffic to move. Another area where we need help is India is trying to attract high value manufacturing in the SEZs. This will require training and skill upgradation, which will also entail costs. Now, what we are seeing is that in these manufacturing units, in the SEZs, if they can be given some subsidies to offset part of the cost of logistics, labor transportation, training, electricity, R&D, treatment of industrial effluents, and any other costs which account for a significant part of the manufacturing cost. The aim is to reduce the cost of manufacturing by subsidizing services used in the manufacturing for exports. This is a common practice followed by many countries in the SEZs, as this is WTO compliant. If India designs such smart subsidies, SEZs would be able to attract manufacturing units and can be engines of inclusive growth, value manufacturing, and exports. And now that when the MEIS scheme has been withdrawn because of not being WTO compliant on merchandise exports, we still have the possibility of subsidizing the certification of manufacturing, which will make Indian manufacturing more attractive and competitive in the global market and be completely WTO compliant. I think we have a huge potential here for certification of manufacturing. And just to share with you the data, you know, from the SEZs, we have seen total exports which were done. The DC Vizag, Mr. Reddy Saab, has given the data in rupees. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just break it down to merchandise exports, not taking into the IT service sector, because that's being also counted for in the IT sector. So the merchandise exports from the SEZs was in 2021, 33.29 billion. And in 2019-20, it was 42.05. Now, a major chunk of these exports are contributions of the HS code 27, which is petroleum and petroleum products, and HS code 71, which is gem and jewelry and precious metals. Now, if these are significant contributors from the SEZ export basket. They contribute almost 50% of Indian merchandise exports is from HS code 27 and HS code 71. So the remaining exports from the SEZ, which is pure manufacturing exports, which is where the entire focus of the country is right now, to increase the manufacturing sector and get the relocating supply chains to do manufacturing within the country and create jobs. This is 17.33 billion in the year 2021, and it was 16.16 billion in 1920. So even during the pandemic, the manufacturing sector without 27 and 71, HS codes 27 and 71, have actually seen an increase, which is quite encouraging and interesting, as Reddy Saab earlier has also mentioned that SEZs have been playing a very significant role. But I think we need to carve out a special policy mechanism for the vanilla manufacturing sector and attract the sunrise sector from China into India. And we have the potential to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that data and insight. As I had mentioned earlier, we will be having a focus segment on the experiences of the gems and jewelry sector in context of SEZs. For this, I will now pass the baton to my colleague, Nikhar Gogna.
Thank you so much, Virat sir. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sector focus segment as part of this all-important webinar. In this segment, we will focus on the impact of SEZs on the gems and jewelry sector. This sector is recognized as one of the champion sectors by the Government of India with the aim to boost investments and manufacturing competitiveness. It is reckoned as one of the fastest growing segments in the Indian economy, and GJEPC has set a target of taking India's gems and jewelry exports to $100 billion by 2025. The overall gross exports of the gems and jewelry sector stood at $25.31 billion in 2020-21, showing a decline of 28.46% YOY, depicting the impact of the pandemic. However, gross exports of gems and jewelry stood at $3.4 billion in the month of April 2021, showing a strong rebound as compared to $36.11 million, that is 273.41 crores for the same period in the previous year. SEZs clearly have been instrumental in making the Indian gems and jewelry sector the fifth, among the top exporters. These 10 zones span across different regions like Mumbai, Surat, Jaipur, Delhi, Kolkata, Vishakhapatnam, and Chennai, and account for about 3.4% of India's total merchandise exports. It is interesting to note here that it is more than the contribution of some of the other major sectors like leather, which was 1.53%, marine, which was 2.15%, and plastic and rubber articles, which were 2.63%. Given the important contribution of SEZs in the success of gems and jewelry sector, any discussion on SEZs would therefore be incomplete without a mention of the sector. I would like to come to Mr. Suvankar Sen, Executive Director, Senco Gold, and Convener, SEZ Division, GJEPC, for his views on the progress of gems and jewelry sector under the SEZ regime. So, how has the experience of gems and jewelry sector been so far in the Indian SEZs? And what are the key policy interventions that can help boost investments and improve the country's global competitiveness?
Thank you, Nikhar, for a wonderful introduction to the gem and jewelry sector. See, the experience for the gem and jewelry sector with regards to SEZ has been very encouraging, I must say. If we look at the numbers, we are talking of MSMEs mostly, and there are 500 manufacturing units in operating out of the 10 SEZs across the country, which is a very encouraging thing that so many companies are keen to work out of SEZs. If we look at the countries from where the SEZs are mostly serving towards is US, Hong Kong, the Middle East. So most of either the trading hubs catering like a Hong Kong catering to the Chinese market, or Dubai catering to the Middle East market, or it's the big consumption market of US that is eating up all the jewelry that is manufactured. And it is all kinds of jewelry that the gem and jewelry sector are producing in the SEZ. If you look at Jaipur, it's the gemstones, processing of gemstones. If you look at Andheri Seeps, it's the jewelry manufacturing that happens catering to the big Walmarts and the JC Penney's of the world. If you look at Surat, India is processing 90% of the rough diamonds, the smaller sizes, and a large part of it is happening in the SEZs as well. So as you rightly said, that if we look at SEZ in the overall gem and jewelry sector, 30% of exports of the gem and jewelry sector. This year, yes, we are down. It's about $28 billion that we did. Prior to that, it was about $36 billion. And out of that, SEZs did about $11 billion. That's 30%, doing more than so many other sectors, the marine or leather that we've been doing. Now, if we look at the various policy improvements that can happen, can really boost the sector. One is that from the various free trade warehouses zones that we have, when we import the raw materials, then we are having to pay the duty. If the government makes a policy that against some bonds, the raw materials can be imported and then worked upon and then further exported without paying off duty, that will enable the liquidity situation in the sector. If you look at the reverse job work policy, now here it has already been mentioned before by one of our fellow panelists that the world market is so integrated. There are times when the world market is going slow and the capacity of the SEZ units are not fully utilized. So if there is a reverse job work policy, if the employees, the karigars, the artisans, we are employing almost 25,000 odd artisans across the country. So if that and the machineries, the investments that have been done, if they can be fully utilized, it will only enable us for a much more stronger Atmanirbhar Bharat. Then there is another issue, which is the transfer of property and assets. Now, a lot of companies, they have invested, they have worked upon, the machineries have become old, they are investing in new machineries, but then they do not feel it very comfortable to dispose of the old machineries, or they want to discontinue the business and sell the asset to a fellow jeweler. So in such a situation, there are a lot of nitty-gritties, a lot of hindrances, and that exit barrier or the smooth flow is not happening. That should be looked upon. And finally, it's been discussed again, I don't want to repeat a lot, on the sunset clause. Financial incentives, support, this is always necessary if we really, really want to be a globally competitive manufacturing industry across not just gem and jewelry, but across the board. So I think these kind of policies would really, really help for making our SEZ stronger. Thank you.
So you've spoken about some of the difficulties that the sector is facing, but are there also some advantages that the sector is facing, by being a part of SEZs?
Yes, surely we cannot ignore of the advantages. See, when there is an SEZ, maybe Andheri Seeps, it's quite a larger SEZ, while Calcutta Manikanchan is a smaller SEZ. But there is a concept of manufacturing hub, So together, when there is a group of companies making similar products, there is a share of knowledge, there is a share of resources, the common facility centers are being worked upon. So that makes the export manufacturing hubs in that particular unit. Then if we really look at it, the way the customs, there has been a support in terms of smooth flow of documents and experience with the customs to clear the goods in a very faster manner, unlike in a DT area where the operations become a little tedious, going to airports with regards to jewelry. The custom clearance under one roof, that makes it very, very easy and smooth. The young labor force that we have, it is employing a lot of artisans, new generation karigars are being employed, and India being, it's a legacy that jewelry manufacturing for the whole world, we have that skill. So that gives a lot of support to us. The infrastructure, the working condition for our artisans in an SEZ, it is much, much more developed than if we look at the traditional markets in which manufacturing is being done. And that will attract the young generation, and the working ambience will be better, and the best practices can be made. And finally, if you look at the foreign investments, the rules are such that the foreign investments can be very, very easy. However, 100% foreign FDIs are allowed, EFC, you can keep 100% remittances. So these smooth flow of transactions can happen. But unfortunately, if I may say, in terms of the difficulties, foreign direct investments in the SEZs have not been that much encouraging. The scope and the potential is much, much more. While the rules are there, we need to attract foreign direct investment. We need to have tie-ups with foreign collaborations in terms of technological advancement that the country needs to do with regards to the sector. And also one challenge, along with the advantages that we have, is the fact that the policies or the processes or the ways the operations are being done across the various 10 SEZs are very different. So while, the development commissioners, they need to work together, the best practices, if there's some good policies are being taken by one DC, such knowledge sharing must happen at the processing and the policy level across the SEZ so that we can work all together in the same direction. So that is what is there from my side.
Right, sir. So what is the vision that the gems and jewelry industry sees for itself in the coming years in terms of international trade? And how can SEZs catalyze its progress towards this vision?
So, Nikhar, like you rightly said, that $36 billion is what we did year before. This year we did about 28, 30, but this year is a pandemic year. We ignore our performance and the 20-30% fall. We are aiming at $100 billion kind of a scale of exports, merchandise exports, which will be a large part of our Indian exports. And the vision is that India should become a hub and the jeweler to the world. So any form of jewelry, be it trading or manufacturing or processing, the world should look towards India. And with that thought process, there has to be policies taken, the free trade warehouse zones, the manufacturing zones. There has to be adoption of breakthrough technologies. We are upskilling our karigars so that if we are benchmarking against the Chinese jewelry manufacturing, the Thailand jewelry manufacturing, or any kind of diamond jewelry processing in Israel, our karigars should have the right kind of skills to be amongst the best in the world. There needs to be a lot of, we have such a strong IT sector. So innovation, research, the application of AI, machine learning is not, more of knowledge of the world. What kind of jewelry, which consumers are taking. If all those knowledge through certain initiatives done by our government and the industry, those will really, really help. And then we need to attract more FDIs. We need to attract funds. There needs to be collaborations. Turkey has become a very major force in jewelry manufacturing. So is Thailand. We need to have tie-ups with them and get the technology into our country. So that kind of a policy needs to be taken. I think, we compare ourselves to a Shenzhen in China or a Demopolis or a Dubai. We need to have their best practices and implement that in our country so that we are ready to be the jewelry hub and the jewelers to the world. That is the vision that the Gem and Jewelry Export Council is working towards.
Right, so it's indeed wonderful. Over to you, Virat. So.
Right. Thank you, Dikar. I will now come back to Reddy, sir, and I would like to ask you, sir, specifically on the Baba Kalyani Committee recommendations, especially the renaming and repurposing of SEZs to economic and employment conclaves. So how do you see the feasibility of this practically, and what can be the challenges with adopting these recommendations in general, the Baba Kalyani Committee recommendations?
All of you know that the Union Commerce Ministry has set up a committee headed by Bharat Force Chairman Baba Kalyani to make its special economic zone policy compatible with the WTO rules after the US challenged India's export subsidy program at the multilateral trade body. That was done in 2018 June, and the report came in, I think, September 2019 or so. And all of you know that we have got a dispute with the WTO, and this already many of the panelists have explained that regarding the subsidies that we are giving to the units here. And one of the main objectives for which the committee was set up was to evaluate the SEZ policy and make it WTO compatible. And secondly, to suggest measures for maximum utilization of vacant land in SEZs. As per the report available with me, the vacant spaces is around 47,496 hectares in the SEZs of the country, and to suggest changes in the SEZ policy based on international experience. It was a beautiful document made by the committee, and also to merge the SEZ policy with other government schemes. The number of government schemes, as already elaborated by our panelists, one of our panelists, that the coastal economic zones, Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, national industrial manufacturing zones, and food and textile parks. There are a number of schemes in the country. Even the EOs are doing the same job, and SEZs are doing the same job. And there's a lot of competition. So how to do away with all these problems and the yields the SEZs are facing? For that purpose, the committee was constituted. And one of the recommendations made by the committee was that to change the name of the SEZs from SEZs to EEEs. That's what is called Employment and Economic Enclaves. And this was discussed some time back with the Honorable Minister also by all the DCs and other people. I've taken the opinion of all the people, I've heard them, and none of them were really impressed with the name. And even the ministry was not convinced with the recommendation of the committee, Baba Kalyani Committee, for change of its name for various reasons. And they said it may not be possible at this point of time, because as we know that the SEZs have been in existence for the more than 16 years. And prior to that, we have export processing zones. It's always, though our focus is, as suggested by them, should be for economic activity and employment generation and other things. But the export was the basic idea behind setting up all these zones and giving all subsidies and encouraging, giving duty benefits and other things to encourage the units to and the developers to make exports. Our basic objective was basically at that time was not employment generation, but employment generation has taken very well. And with the exports going up, see, you have to enlarge your exports, you have to engage more people, and naturally you will give this. We need not emphasize. The employment will get generated automatically as the production goes up, exports goes up. Like the country is providing employment to the tune of 22.15 lakh. There's a direct employment, and the indirect employment, it has been estimated by very good organizations that will be to the tune of 2 to 2.5 times. That means about 40 to 60 lakh employment is provided indirectly also. It was basically recommended to de-link with the export related things, but otherwise I feel that this is not very feasible because the whole country is adopting the nomenclature of SEZs everywhere. And probably we will get drifted from the concept, and many people have not shown much interest in the change of the name. This is what I feel. Renaming the change will, of course, change the perception of identity of SEZs itself, which is almost, we have built a brand name of 16 years. Now we have to go on start advocating everybody what is EEE. Now you say any common man also, you say I'm SEZ, SEZ commissioner. They don't even realize SEZ. You have to say I'm a SEZ commissioner, then they will realize. So we are working in the SEZ. These are the SEZs. So everybody knows. That's what I feel. And probably the ministry has also taken the same opinion. And SEZ is definitely doing very nice job by generating a lot of employment. There's no doubt. It's growing continuously. Even during pandemic time, we have seen that our employment, I can say from VSCZ, has increased by 10%. Everywhere it has gone down, excepting for a month or so, 1% has come down, then later again picked up, and with the starting of 3 more special economic zones, our employment has gone up to 10% more, and now presently the VSCZ employs around 4,29,000 people directly. This is what I feel. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to come to Mr. Harsh Shiru Gursani, because I think the legal aspect is perhaps the most critical right now, because we have faced a legal issue with SEZ provisions at the WTO. So I would like to ask you, sir, how does India's experience and how do our provisions compare with other developing countries, because they focus on SEZs as well? So what is the legal challenge exactly which we face, and what are the legal solutions which you suggest in this current scenario?
Thank you, Rajji, for the question, and thank you for TPCI for organizing this webinar. Before I answer the questions, I would just state that my views are my personal and not attributable to any organization or my clients whom I may have represented. We're all aware that in 2018, US challenged India's certain schemes, including the SEZ policy. And it's, before we go into that, it is important to note that SEZs per se are not in conflict with WTO laws. As you said in the introductory remarks as well, there are around 140 countries that have SEZs, and in their various forms currently present as well. The challenge that was actually raised by United States against India's SEZs alleged that India provides export contingent subsidies. Now, under the WTO, there are multiple agreements, one of which is the Subsidies and Countervailing Measures Agreement, the SCM agreement. Article 3 of the SCM agreement prohibits members from member countries from providing subsidies that are contingent or incentives that are solely based on export performance. India's defense to these allegations by United States was two-pronged. First was, of course, that India claimed that Article 3, which prohibits export subsidies, does not apply to India because India is a developing country, and Irrespective, we should get an 8-year transition period to apply these rules. And second was that the incentives provided under SEZ, uh, under SEZs are not actually subsidies or are not export solely dependent on exports as well. Now, under the SCM agreement, in the first defense that India had raised, Article 3 is, so under SCM agreement, there's another provision, Article 27, which allows developing countries not to apply Article 23 or removes the effect of Article 3 on developing countries, provided their per capita income is less than 1,000 US dollars. In around 2015 to 17, India's per capita income breached that $1,000 threshold. And that was actually the causal effect which led to US filing this complaint. Now, while a number of panelists have already stated that India lost this case, while India has had an adverse ruling at the panel stage, India has appealed this. So this matter is still sub judice. India claimed that specifically with regard to Article 27, that all other developing countries got an 8-year transition period when the agreement came into effect, which was in 1995. So from 1995 to 2003, they had a transition period, and India should get the same transition period. And this is something that is pending before the appellate body. The second defense that India had pointed out was irrespective of the application of Article 27, that the incentives that are provided under SEZs are not actually subsidies. Now, the SCM agreement also provides that if you're giving subsidies, say a customs benefit that is given to inputs that are used in the manufacturing of the exported product. So say if I get buttons from outside and stitch them onto a shirt and export the shirt, then the custom duties on buttons, so on and so forth, the thread that is imported, it's okay, those are not considered subsidies. Fiscal incentives, on the other hand, if they're completely dependent on export performance, are considered subsidies. So India stated that the customs benefits that are provided to SEZ units are actually on inputs that are consumed by the SEZ units to manufacture products meant for export markets. And second, that the NFE requirement, we've already discussed the net foreign exchange, positive net foreign exchange requirement, is not, it's not completely dependent on the export performance. And this is something that this could be achieved even through domestic supply. And one example of that was the Noida SEZ, who actually has a positive, sale to domestic tariff area rather than exports in terms of absolute figures. While the panel refused to agree with India's defense, and India has now appealed to the appellate body in the WTO, and we are hoping to have a hearing there sometime in the next year or so, and we'll get a concrete decision there. But coming back to your specific question as well, India is not the only developing country that has SEZs, and one example of this change that came about was from Dominican Republic, where they actually removed the export contingency. And that's one of the proposals that has been put across even by Baba Kalyani report, that you move the focus from just incentivizing exports to the 3 E's: create employment, have more innovation. And as soon as you have more R&D, more innovation, and more employment, you will have increased production, which will automatically result in increased exports. So the idea, at least legally, should be to focus more on the other benefits that SEZs provide and how to make SEZ's unit more globally competitive rather than focusing on just exports.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I would like to come to now Professor Partha Pratimbal, although as Mr. Gursahani said that this is a case which we are still contesting, but obviously it has an impact on how we plan our policy ahead. At least that's what seems from all the reports we read, that the government is considering this fact that these subsidies have been challenged. So in the larger context, sir, what do you think India can make? I mean, what changes can be made to the SEZ policy framework in the upcoming FTP, ensuring they make it remain attractive to investors, also help the Indian industry become stronger in terms of value-added manufacturing, innovation, etc. So, what do you see as the policy priorities for the government going forward at this juncture?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Mr. Gosani said, that there are two types of subsidies in WTO, actionable subsidies and prohibitive subsidies. If it is actionable subsidies, which is given to a specific industry, so if you give that, somebody will have to prove injury. But for prohibitive subsidy, they can just impose the countervailing duty on you. Now, there are two approaches I can think of. One is the conventional approach, which says, yes, delink the NFE concept with whatever fiscal incentives you are giving. And also try to use, I think Mr. Rallan was also saying that, try to give the WTO compatible input subsidies as much as possible and not link that with the export NFE equal to NFE positive. But here I must want to express one little bit of an interest, an observation, that when people talk about SEZs and performance, why don't they talk about imports as well? I'm only seeing the export figures, but what about the import figures? If the NFE is the number which is so important, then we need to know the NFE number instead of the gross export numbers, right? And in sectors like gems and jewelry, I'm sure the import content is pretty high. Anyway, so that's one. This is a digression. However, I have a radical approach. You must have seen the Biden's budget, like $6 trillion of government support to industries to make America competitive. Will USA be in a position to challenge India's little bit of subsidy here and there once they introduce this policy? Because this is clearly going to be a massive support, massive subsidization of the US industry. And USA is in no mood to elect the appellate body members to make the appellate body functional right now. So Mr. Gosani was saying that we are expecting to meet at the appellate body. I wonder whether USA is in a mood to get those people elected so that we can have a functional WTO dispute settlement system anytime soon. Because look at their policies. That's the biggest ever fiscal incentive given to the US industries openly to make them more competitive, right? So if that is the case, then let us go ahead and do whatever we want to, whatever subsidy, whatever incentivization we want to give to our industries. Maybe the time is right for that. Let us not bother too much about USA and WTO cases for the time being. That's possibly one approach. The other approach is, yes, remove the export contingent measures and then you give subsidies, but make them actionable subsidies so that somebody will have to challenge you, then prove you where. WTO, it doesn't work. So that might be one way of looking at it. Another big problem is the sale to the domestic tariff area. We were thinking about it. Why doesn't the government make the SEZs pay the minimum possible tariff that is applicable across all FTAs? Just make the FTA pay a duty to make them at par, at the same platform with the other domestic manufacturers, but pick out the least possible FTA duty for each product and make those applicable for the FTAs who are selling in the domestic tariff area. Will that work? Will that make things slightly better? Because clearly we have seen that when the international market is not working, and unfortunately India's SEZ policy were introduced in a time where we see two major disruptions in the international market. First, the financial crisis, and now the COVID crisis, before we could fully recover from that. So I think it will be very, very important to make, to allow the SEZs to sell in the domestic tariff area, but to make them slightly different from the domestic manufacturers, maybe it should attract the minimum possible FTA duty that is available across all the free trade agreements that we have. Again, I'm coming back to the point that I was making, that if you are making a policy for the future, as Mr. Suvankar was also talking about, that try to take advantage of the agglomeration policy, try to bring in same industries, same type of industries in one big area, that reduces the cost for the industry as a whole. So once you get out of the legal side, how to manage your industries, try to think about these in these terms. Try to rope in the high technology, high innovation kind of industries into your special economic zone. So that will be broadly my thrust. And overall, to sum it up, if others are playing the WTO game in their own way, let us also play the WTO game in our own way. WTO, you have to play the WTO game. I mean, other countries are doing it in some way. If you just try to follow try to be fair to the WTO system, you may end up being unfair to your own domestic industry. So that is my point.
Okay. So you're saying that it's actually we have to look at our interests and combat this specific ruling.
Absolutely. I think USA is just doing that. It is free trade when it suits them. When it doesn't suit them, they introduce all sorts of log jumps in the WTO process.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir, for your views. Now, I would like to come to Mr. Suvankar Sen. Sir, we have seen some interesting government initiatives over the past year or so. Atmanirbhar Bharat and ODOP in particular is what I'm talking about. So how do you see SEZ synchronizing with these initiatives, and how do you see the government, or how can policy encourage more MSMEs to ramp up their investments in SEZs in India?
Right. So with regards to the Atmanirbhar Bharat, as a gem and jewelry sector, we must acknowledge that the raw materials, most gold, silver, gemstone, diamonds, most of the raw materials, they are not in this country. However, we are amongst the top 5 export nations with regards to gem and jewelry sector because of our inherent strength of labor and skill. So we are also looking at the lab-grown diamonds. We as a country are becoming the largest exporter of the lab-grown diamonds, which is diamonds that are made in through machineries in laboratories. So that has been an investment that our industry, certain players have done, and now they are supplying to the America, US, Canada, and the North American nations and Europe. So this has also been a great achievement for the sector with regards to the Atmanirbhar, where we are depending on ourselves, and our imports of jewelry has been very, very minimum. We are importing machineries. Yes, if you really say that government needs to maybe give us more incentive and support, that we can import the best of machineries from the world and learn from them, and then also create machineries for manufacturing, along with the fact that we are manufacturing in those machineries with the latest technologies. Secondly, with regards to ODOP, which is one district, one product, along with NCAER, we've done a research and we have identified 390 districts in which we can create clusters, the gem and jewelry clusters, and we are working upon it. Yes, it's not possible to make all the clusters export oriented. There needs to be a lot of knowledge transfer, confidence building, logistics, infrastructure in the interior districts. But the major hubs that are already existing, if slowly, in an encircling manner, if gradually people from the other clusters can become suppliers to the big clusters, if there can be any kind of collaboration that can be done, that will be really, really helpful. So for that, I think the industry and the government together, they need to build awareness programs in regards to encouraging people that yes, you can export, or you can be a supplier to an exporter. So such programs needs to be planned out together. The benefits of banks, foreign exchange, convention centers, authorized dealers, all of that are there in the SEZs. So be it in the major cluster, minor cluster, once these small MSMEs know that yes, these benefits are there, along with that, if there is financial support, because truly speaking, capital requirements for our sector has grown up tremendously. The way the prices of gold is going up, the way the price of silver is going up, unless the banking sector comes and supports, and we become a preferred sector in the whole system, it will be difficult for the MSMEs to really come in. The exit and the entry barriers have to be made easy. People will have to try. Unless they try, they will not succeed. But the fact is that because of certain constraints, they are scared to try. And finally, we must say that integrating, coming together, opportunities are there. China has done so well. We need to learn from them, and there has to be trust between the industry and the government. That yes, at least we are all working for the growth of the nation. Yes, in that, as a capitalist, as an entrepreneur, there will be profits created. But that should not be looked down upon. With the employment generation, the foreign exchange earning, all those benefits that the economy overall has, and the way we are bringing in money from outside the country into the country, that should be appreciated. So I think that's how we should look at it, and MSMEs will surely thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One final question for Mr. Harsh Gosani. After that, we can open it for audience questions. Sir, there is a recommendation that India should set up future zones of excellence in manufacturing in proximity to the ports and manufacturing hubs, and they should be led by the government, the central government. How do you view the implementations or the possibility of such zones in the coming years?
Thank you, Raji. As I said in my previous intervention as well, I personally believe that SEZs in India should arise to be zones of excellence in manufacturing. They should move towards, as what was stated in the Baba Kalyani report as well, should move towards creating more employment, more innovation, so on and so forth. While, I agree with the intervention that was made by Reddy sir as well, that changing the name per se is not the solution. It is actually imbibing the ideas of the 3 E's into the policy to ensure that these SEZs become akin to a regional powerhouse that generate more value and increase international trade as well as domestic trade. These SEZ units should rather be incentivized for for their focus on innovation, technology, as well as investment into R&D and all the other allied factors, rather than focusing just mainly on exports. I personally feel that once you focus on these innovations and other aspects apart from exports will automatically increase. I also feel that the manufacturing SEZs in India should tailor themselves to be an integral part of the global value chains. India can subsidize the services that are linked to manufacturing, as Rallan sir was saying as well. Services do not fall under the ambit of the SCM agreement, so the government can step in to give subsidies for services. When you delink or demerge the bundle of manufacturing SEZs into their manufacturing component and the services components, you can, the central government actually has the option to go in and subsidize at least the services parts of even a manufacturing SEZ. And that is something which will help India, the SEZs to grow much more than what they're growing right now. Certainly, I mean, manufacturing SEZs, if they are closer to ports or if they are provided with infrastructure that is, the state of the class infrastructure, they are going to boost in increasing the productivity and increasing the share of goods that they actually manufacture and consequently export. So, and I mean, if we look at history as well, we have the first SEZ that was established near Kandla, which is again near a port. We have the bigger SEZs like the Vishakhapatnam SEZ, which is again closer to ports. Manufacturing, considering the trade of goods, is going to happen more through either sea route or actually international trade at least is going to happen mainly through sea. It is always advisable to have them closer to the ports. It will reduce their costs, it will increase their competency, and will make them will also aid in actually getting them as a part of global value chains. I also hear what Senji was saying about gems and jewelry sectors. becoming a part of a global value chain, tying up with sectors or clusters across the world and ensuring that there is a smooth transition where either a semi-finished good can come into India, get processed into either the next level of semi-finished good or the final good, and then get re-exported again to the other markets. And that was also one of the core principles on which Chinese SEZs were made. They have now become so integral to global value chains that it is difficult for companies that are headquartered elsewhere to, completely move out of China as well. India is already giving incentives for companies to set up manufacturing facilities in India. I think if there are, these zone of excellences which have the best of infrastructure as well as options for increasing our research and development and innovation next to the ports will be a bigger incentive for these companies to include plants or SEZ units in India, which will form a part of their global value chains. Before I think I also wanted to just quickly respond to Professor Pal as well. In terms of at least the policy recommendations going forward, there are two things. Of course, I mean, India can choose the route of not agreeing to WTO, and at the end of the day, as of today, the panel report is in abeyance. It is subject to US actually agreeing and having appellate body members put in place at the WTO before it can proceed. So till the time the hearing does not conclude and the case is not adjudicated, there is an in effect stay. So government of India is free to continue the policies as they were before the challenge. However, irrespective, we do know, and as international trade lawyer and an economist, we do realize that subsidies are inherently trade distorting. While subsidies which are primarily contingent on export are more trade distorting than normal subsidies, and we suggest that having normal subsidies is better than giving prohibited subsidies, such as the ones that are completely contingent on export performance. I completely agree with the recommendation that Professor Pal made as well, that we should allow more sale to domestic tariff areas. We should try and open up whether if the government can actually implement a policy in a manner where the most favorable FTA rate is applicable to SEZs to sell into the domestic tariff area, that's great. You also need to look at it from the companies that are present in the domestic tariff area. So there were proposals even in the Baba Kalyani report which said that you could perhaps look at an equalization levy that can offset some of the benefits that have been given to the SEZ units so that they are at par with the domestic units and should be, they should be allowed to sell in the domestic tariff area as well. And of course, I mean, job work, it's something that is, or rather should be allowed. Obviously, there would be a slight levy of taxes that the government may need to levy on job work that the SEZ units perform for DTA units, but I think there is no other way around, and that should be allowed per se. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That brings us to the end of the questions. I'll just see if there are some audience questions. Can I have all the panelists now on screen? One question from the audience is definitely regarding the Baba Kalyani recommendations. What can be accepted out of that, and why do you think there is a still been a lot of delay in actually going by those recommendations? What is feasible and workable? Anybody would like to answer on that?
If I may step in, I would like to suggest, based on the Baba Kalyani report inputs, number one, the sales into the domestic area, once the NFE conditions that were mentioned earlier, the export linkages that were there, if that has been removed, in the past when we had Nokia and these companies way back in 2006, 2007, these companies were selling their mobile phones at that time primarily into the Indian domestic market, because at that time we had what is called as the ITA, the Information Technology Agreement, which meant that these products could be sold into India at concessional rates of duties, and the sale proceeds would be taken as part of the NFE conditions. But later on, this policy was changed, and then the NFE issues started to become a challenge. Now, the mover scheme that I was referring to earlier allows all of these remission of import taxes and duties to be made available, just like it is being done in the case of SEZs. And the mover scheme, which is, a rehash of something that was there for several years, in its new avatar, does not give any limitations on value addition or on percentage of exports or percentage of DTA. So in theory, a factory under a mover scheme can sell 100% of its production into the domestic tariff area. Number one. Number two, there is no NFE requirement which is available over there. So it is completely, in that sense, WTO compliant, because in the WTO, the issue is not the remission of import taxes and duties on the product that goes into the manufacturing, but on the capital equipment that is used, which is duty-free. That is not directly being used in the export product. So that is what is becoming the challenge. And that's why the EPCG scheme also has been challenged, because the EPCG scheme, the machine itself is not going to the export product. So the mover scheme has already shown us the way. And I think if the Department of Commerce and the DOR can come in on the same page, because the mover scheme is a scheme which is owned by the Department of Revenue. The SEZ scheme is owned by the Department of Commerce. And I would urge both the ministries to work as an Indian policy rather than as a departmental policy to align both the schemes. And as Reddy sir has already said, we have too many schemes. So even the users are sometimes, like in many ways, they are PT shopping. Right now, there is scheme shopping, which actually confuses the industry, confuses investors. So we need to align these schemes, and both can actually coexist, because many factories who want to be standalone factories, existing factories, which are not in SEZ, they are standalone factories set up, several years ago. New factories which are comfortable being standalone factories can go under the mover scheme. But there are also many factories who want to be in a cluster, like a cluster infrastructure which is provided by an SEZ. So having both the schemes running parallel, we are actually going to be able to capture every kind of requirement from a potential user or a unit that is seeking manufacturing infrastructure. We don't have to turn away anybody. We can have both systems running parallelly to each other. So that's number one, supply of DTA based on the duty foregone principle. What Harsh was mentioning, and the professor was also saying that, duties should be on the least duty tariff on the FTA agreement. We've been working with the ministry for the past, I would say, 11 years to bring in this concept of, duties being levied under the least tariff rate for FTAs. The problem with that was in the ministry and Department of Revenue, because we have different FTAs, different commodities. All commodities are not covered by all the FTAs. There are different sets of commodities and different sets of tariff rates. So it was becoming a very cumbersome exercise as to picking out the least rate for that particular product. Secondly, to avail of the free trade agreement tariff rates, you've got to have a value addition of at least 35 to 40%, which is the local content addition. Now in the SEZ, they were not always able to, come forward and say whether the value addition took place, because that would have immediately applied. Now in the mover scheme, there is no requirement of value addition or NFE being NFE positive, but they have a very interesting concept, which is the duty foregone principle, which means whatever inputs are used in that product sold into the DTA, duties applicable on those products alone will be levied to duty at the rate which is applicable to that particular HS code in that commodity, not the finished product, which is a different from the concept being followed in the SEZ. So the mover scheme is a Department of Revenue scheme, and if this can be implemented by them, I think we should be able to, the Department of Commerce should be able to get them to buy in on this recommendation for the SEZs as well. The reverse job work is very, very critical because, you know, Uberization of manufacturing capacity is going to be the order of the day. There are a lot of technologies, especially in the electronic sector, where the entire lifetime of the technology is maybe less than 2 to 3 years. And there are people willing to bring these technologies, setting up in the SEZs, because they want to be able to sweat the asset completely. These machines have to run 36 hours, 10 days a week to recover their capital. They can't work in a typical fashion that we've been used to, where the machine is probably running, you know, 6 or 7 hours a day. These assets are going to be outdated in 3 years, and they've got to get their capital back. And we see that potential being available. And reverse job working for DTA is a concept that the mover scheme once again permits that. And whatever services are rendered and the service fee that is being levied is subject to IGST when it is supplied into the DTA. And any components that go into that particular service that is done for DTA is charged to import tariff at the component level, in case it's an import component. So we have the methodology available. We just need the mindset and to implement these things and become more, you know, progressive and proactive if we have to compete with the factories that are being attracted into Vietnam and into Thailand. We have the potential, we have the ability. Now we just need to demonstrate the will.
Thank you, sir. Because of the shortage of time, I will just take one last question. You're always welcome to mail us separately after the webinar if you have any additional questions. For Mr. Harsh Kursani, there's one question for you where if you would see also in the chat box,
Yeah.
which says, why don't we get rid of obsolete words such as incentives, subsidies, etc., and package them with PLI benefits, employment benefit, export with sale to local markets, so that we can combat the WTO's, the way he's worded it, as you can see. So what do you think of this and how can we tackle this?
So, you know, there are two things. One, I would actually resonate what Rallanji was saying as well, that the manner in which these are put across is what is relevant. The WTO does not challenge, just the term that we are using, that say it's export. It's not just the term subsidy that they are looking at. These are concepts. So if in effect you are providing a subsidy, that is likely to get challenged even later. However, the new schemes that are coming, the government is already looking at ensuring that these new schemes are WTO compatible. Similar, just to take an example, is say ROTEP that is replacing MEIS. Under MEIS as well, while the concept was the same in one sense, that there would be a rebate that would be given, here the rebate is actually on the actual taxes that are embedded in the product that is exported out of the country. Now, for the products that are being exported, it is clear any item, any input that is used in this, in the manufacture, it's consumed while manufacturing the exported product, has to be refunded, and the government is free to refund that. In the MEIS days, at least, what I understand was that they did not go through the entire exercise of calculating it, and which is why we face the flag. Under the ROTEP scheme, the government is taking pains to go through the entire exercise to determine rates as per what should be applicable to each particular product. Similar concept should be drawn across to SEZs as well, where where you're looking at the reverse, say, job work. You have so there are certain benefits that are being provided to SEZ units. You can have an approximate equalization levy, whether you look at it from the perspective of the duty foregone or the final product, the duty applicable. I do understand that the duty applicable on the final product may not always work best, but there are also options where the duty applicable on the final product would be beneficial if you're selling to DTA. For example, specifically under SAFTA, there are a number of products which are zero duty, and the inputs per se have a higher duty, because we've been trying to ensure that we have, indigenization as well as looking at promoting Indian manufacturing and replacing inputs. And which is why, we have the reverse duty structure that is applicable on multiple products across multiple industries across across Indian industries, where the duties that are applicable on inputs are higher than the duty that are applicable on the final product, which is why it is a comparison that the Indian government would need to carry out to realize or determine how best can we address these issues. To simply answer the question, while we are getting rid of the terms, calling them subsidies or calling them in another way, we are packaging them better, also ensuring that they are WTO compliant rather than just, on the face of it, making them sound WTO compliant. Thank you.
Right. I think we'll have to cut it short here because we've really run out of time. But thank you so much, all of you, for your invaluable inputs. And it's obviously a discussion we would like to take forward. And I would like to especially thank Reddy sir for answering the audience questions live while we were talking. Thank you so much, sir, for your cooperation in that regard, and really appreciate that. So thank you, everyone. And it's been a wonderful session with all of you. We look forward to future discussions on this and other important topics in the context of global trade. Any quick closing remarks anybody would like to make?
There's one live answer question to be answered from Mr.
Yes.
Abhinav.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would like to say that the SMEs are being set up very well in all the SEZs. It's not like that. I tell you an example that we have got built up spaces here. I don't know, this question answer is not going from here. Am I visible? Yeah. So I just wanted to answer to Abhinav that one simple, electric scooter assembly unit came to VSCZ. They have taken just 1,000 square feet, nothing more than that. And they were planning to put only 20 people. And they wanted to import all the battery and everything from Australia and make the chassis here and then assemble it and again re-export to Australia. So we have got, say, trading sheds here of 1,000 square feet. And the charges in the government SEZs are so low that just it's not even comparable to what the residential accommodation that we take outside. So at VSCZ, we are charging very nominal. It comes to 9 rupees per square feet per month. That's the rent that we are charging. And the approvals to SMEs are also given, MSMEs are also given within just 1 month. You come to us and give an application today, and in the next USC, your unit is approved, you can start it immediately. If some unit is not able to perform in the SEZ, it's not because of any shortcoming in the policy or the concept of the SEZ or the incentives provided by the government or any other issue. It's only their non-performance. They are unable to manage their resources. They are unable to run their show. That's what I would like to answer. MSMEs are equally welcomed here. We have got even right now, if anybody is ready to come, I can give 4 floors ready. Anybody can start within 1 week. And we have got near about 80,000 square feet ready built up space. Wants to run their startups, they can come and just start.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for those encouraging words. And thank you all. Yes, sir.
One quick question that the WTO rules about subsidies in manufacturing and services are very different. And here, Baba Kalyani's point that you should have separate rules for manufacturing and services may be useful. I think we didn't explore that point enough, but I think that is something we need to keep in mind. And one final point, that shouldn't the entire country be like an SEZ eventually?
That's an interesting food for thought as we close. Thank you so much, sir.